So I'm just going to kind of switch modes here and go to something a little bit lighter, a little bit closer to home, and kind of quickly go over the problem we have in Florida here with these algae blooms. And I realized that at one point I didn't exactly know what an algae bloom really was. And I kind of looked it up a little bit, and basically it's just an excessive growth of algae. And most of the algae blooms are good and they're beneficial because they're tiny plants that are food for the animals. But there is a percentage, it's a small percentage, but it's still too high of algae that is harmful algae. They're referred to as HAB or red tide. And the red tide cause a lot of harmful effects. Some of them are blocking sunlight from reaching other organisms, causing a depletion of oxygen levels in the water, secreting toxins into the water. They can even injure animals, lead to fish die-offs, cities having to cut off water to residents, states closing fisheries. They can cause illness and death in humans if they're bad enough. And one of the most well-known harmful algae blooms is the Florida red tide, caused by a type of algae that produces a potent neurotoxin, and it kills iconic marine wildlife, impairs our beaches, and it makes people sick. So what causes it? Basically, around this area, it's the phosphorus and the nitrogen in our fertilizer. When plants around here receive fertilizer, if they are over fertilized, anything the plant doesn't use goes into the waterways, and then the algae blooms are created. The challenge for us Floridians is to not use any more fertilizer than the plants would use, and use it in such a way that the plant will absorb it. And so how bad is it in Florida with the algae blooms? Pretty bad. The Ocean Conservancy calls the algae blooms in Florida a crisis. In 2018, the red tide was so bad it killed an unprecedented number of fish and wildlife and prompted a state of emergency. Scientists at the National Ocean Service have been monitoring and studying this phenomenon for a number of years to determine how to detect and forecast the location of the blooms. The goal is to give communities advance warning so they can adequately plan for and deal with the adverse environmental and health effects. And I have this chart up here, and it's kind of hard to read, but it basically summarizes the human and marine impacts. For instance, red tides can create dead zones that are too low in oxygen to support most marine life. The right side of the chart recommends two actions, which are restoring shellfish beds and monitoring and research to track and forecast the red tides. So at the county and city level, there are fertilizer ordinances to help protect the waters. These are just guiding laws that fertilizer companies, applicators, and citizens have to follow. Not all city and county ordinances are up to date and as effective as they should be. As of 2017, all springs-based areas are required to comply with the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act. 24 of 30 springs have been found to have excess levels of nitrogen pollution, particularly nitrate. Sources of nitrate or nitrogen in these systems can include wastewater, water from septic tanks, stormwater runoff, fertilizer runoff from both urban and agriculture lands. So here is an example of fertilizer ordinance requirements. This one's from Lake County. The Keep Florida Beautiful organization is trying to use Lake County's ordinance as a template for other cities and counties. The requirements here are pretty simple. No fertilizer with nitrogen or phosphorus from June 1st to September 30th. And then conversely, from October 1st to May 31st, you have to use 50% or more slow release nitrogen. And then also, no application of fertilizer within 15 feet of the shoreline. The fertilizer you buy, it needs to conform to these requirements. And when applying the fertilizer, just really make sure you don't over fertilize. Go by the label to avoid over fertilizing. If you have a shoreline in your yard, make sure there's plenty of plants on the shoreline and don't remove any that are there. They serve as a filter and a last line of defense for the water. And finally, ask yourself if you really need to use fertilizer at all, as many yards can thrive without it. So this presentation was basically just kind of a awareness thing and to bring it up in people's minds again.